Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, providing more than 41,000 jobs in the production of wood pallets, railroad ties, white oak barrels, hardwood floors, and more. Details at choosewood.com.
This is St. Louis on the Air from St. Louis Public Radio. I'm Elaine Cha. At least 105 people have died behind bars in a Missouri prison this year, and that's just one sign that things are not all right in the state's 21 correctional centers. Thanks to a policy change earlier this year, families are prohibited from sending their loved ones letters or books directly through the mail. And there's also injustice. Even in cases of wrongful conviction, Missouri law has limited room to free innocent people of their sentences. In 2023, more than 13,000 people entered Missouri prisons. The system holds about 23,000 people. Even with such numbers, the lives of those who are incarcerated and what their families experience remain largely hidden behind walls, bars, and red tape. Michelle Smith is trying to bring the conversation about all this into the open. The group she founded, called the Missouri Justice Coalition, is currently on a statewide tour of town halls, and she joins us now to talk about it. Michelle, welcome back to St. Louis on the Air.
Thank you, Elaine. Thank you very much.
Before we talk about the tour, tell us about this coalition. What was it that brought you to the point of creating this group?
Well, I'll say this was something that I had been thinking about for a very long time. However, I didn't want to add any more work to my own plate. So I, put it off. But in early 2022, there was a bill that one of our local elected representatives filed in the legislature about prison oversight. And the chair, I believe, of the Judiciary Committee finally gave the bill a hearing. So I was contacted about trying to get people to our capital. Jeff City is far from everybody, right? It's not around the corner, especially when you have issues of transportation. It's hard to get there. Mm-hmm. So we did the work to get about 50 or 60 people to the Capitol last April. The hearing was held. It was a successful hearing. However, the bill did not get passed because we don't have a unified coalition of prison organizers, advocates, et cetera, in our state to really push this conversation forward. Mm-hmm. So after that hearing and seeing how successful the hearing was, but that more work needed to be done, I decided to found Mo Justice, which is the acronym I use. And I founded the organization to, again, like you said, push forward the conversation, the issues of our statewide prison system, how many problems that are hidden from the public, and to shine a light on that.
Yeah. So there are 21 correctional facilities. How is it that you keep up with what is going on in the state's prisons, Michelle?
Well, of course, I can't know everything, and nobody can because there is such non-transparency. But I do have communication with many people who are incarcerated. I have a couple other people that I work with who, are in communication with people inside as well. So we try our best to get these issues out, to be the spokesperson for our incarcerated loved ones.
Mm-hmm. Now, you do have a personal connection to this issue. You yourself have been incarcerated. How does that inform the work that you're doing now?
Well, my own incarceration really drives my passion and dedication for this work. I was in women's prison in Missouri from 2012 to 2015, and during that time, many people around me died unnecessarily, and there were so many other issues going on. And I remember saying to myself, I'm going to do something about this. Mm-hmm. And so, of course, it took me some years in my own work, but it definitely is, my experience really drives what I'm doing right now. I met so many amazing people when I was incarcerated myself. Mm-hmm. So there's so many people that I left behind that I continue to advocate for. And creating this organization is really that culmination of me trying to do something about the issues that I even saw firsthand.
Mm-hmm. I'd like to invite you to the conversation. Do you have a question about Missouri's prison system for Michelle Smith or a suggestion for what needs change? Give us a call at 314-382-8255. That's 382-TALK, or you can send us a tweet at STL on air or email us at stlpr.org. So now let's talk about the statewide town hall tour. Why are you doing this tour in so many different places and in this format?
Well, a few months ago, I knew that I needed to do something. I needed to get out in community. All of our prisons, over 20 prisons, they're not in St. Louis or they're not in Kansas City. They're not in urban areas. They're all in rural Missouri. And with doing this work, I know that the people who are closest to the problem are closest to the solution, as one of my mentors, Glenn Martin, says. Mm-hmm. And so I knew that I need to get out to the people who are impacted. I get a lot of calls from wives and girlfriends and mothers from places like Springfield or St. Joe or Rolla, Missouri, about what's going on to their own loved one. And I decided that I'm going to, get in my car, drive around the state, and connect with these people, talk to them, and bring forth the fact that we need to have a unified prison advocacy movement and invite them into this space with me.
Mm-hmm. Now, this tour started on November 4th in Springfield, Missouri, and you've since been to Kansas City, and you were in St. Louis this past weekend. Michelle, so far, what is it that stands out to you, and what are people focused on?
Honestly, we are so focused on the fact that our incarcerated loved ones are not getting humane treatment. I've talked to, wives and mothers of people who are incarcerated that are being abused, that are being traumatized with like extended solitary confinement. There are so many things going on, and the main issue is that there is very little focus on actual rehabilitation and humane conditions within our prison system. And also, I've met so many people who are dedicated, people who write the DOC, call DOC, who are really wanting to make sure that their loved ones are treated properly and they come home better than they did when they went in. Mm-hmm. And that gives me a lot of hope because like me, there are other people that want to make a difference, but we really need to be unified in pushing forward, those changes that we need.
Mm-hmm. Your first 3 stops have been in cities. You were talking about the location, though, of these correctional facilities being in rural areas. Yeah. Is there something different about how folks in rural areas experience these issues?
Well, I believe that because our prisons are in rural Missouri and there are a lot of people from those communities in prison, it goes unaddressed. There is not a huge media conglomerate in a lot of these communities, right? So sometimes when a person dies in prison, actually last week this happened, a small newspaper in that community ran 2 paragraphs, a person in prison in Farmington died, and nothing else. So there's really no investigation, or there's not a lot of focus on actually what is going on. And I think that, of course, rural Missouri is, forgotten about in so many different respects. Prison issues is definitely is definitely one of those places where people in rural Missouri are not focused on, or not looked to, or not spoken to, but they are, suffering. Just like, of course, people in urban areas go to prison, but a lot of people in rural Missouri, there are entire towns in Missouri where over 90% of the residents have been incarcerated.
And do you think that has to do with a kind of bias against people who are from rural areas?
I think that even more than the bias, I think is the fact that those communities are poor. They don't have opportunities. That the jobs, manufacturing, et cetera, are leaving those communities. So I think it's a combination of just those economic realities as well as just bias and people who are in poverty anyway.
Yeah. Now, one of the focuses of this town hall tour is empathy for those who experience living in prison. What is it that you mean by empathy, and why does that require such focused attention?
I think the reality that people incarcerated do experience a lot of inhumane conditions, disrespectful treatment, tells us that we need more empathy, not just inside a prison like the officers or the guards or the administration, but in public. People out here who can have a voice in this say, oh, well, they shouldn't have did wrong to go to prison. And that possibly is the case. People shouldn't do wrong. However, just because someone does wrong does not mean they lose their humanity. That does not mean they cease becoming people. They are still people. They're still someone's loved ones, and they still need to be treated humanely, even in a situation where they are incarcerated. So that aspect of empathy really is about us and how we, look at the people who are incarcerated, because we wouldn't be okay with these conditions we wouldn't be okay with these conditions with animals in animal shelters.
Right.
Right. And so that aspect of empathy really is about understanding that people do not lose their humanity no matter what they do or where they go.
Right. Now, the St. Louis Town Hall took place over this past weekend, and St. Louis on the Air producer Danny Wysentowski was there, and he talked with Ronnie Amin. Ronnie spent 25 years in Missouri's prison system until his release on parole in 2018, and he said that his takeaway from the event was hope.
So I'm hopeful because while incarcerated, you exist in a space of despair. You feel as though no one can really understand what you're going through, and many, quite frankly, feel as though you deserve to be in spaces of squalor and harm, and this is retribution for harm created. However, today informs us that there are people who really invest in our humanity, who understand that our existence is very important. Not only that, but it's important for the transition back into community, because you want healthy people coming back into the community. You want people who are addressing their traumas, not people who experience more trauma while incarcerated.
That was Ronnie Amin speaking after the town hall on Saturday. Michelle, his description of hope, what does that make you feel, hearing him share that?
Well, first, Ronnie is a very, very good friend of mine, and I so appreciate, his work and his presence at the town hall. And I think I also felt hopeful. I think that when you're in a space with people who really understand the issues that are happening and, come up and say, I want to join with you to do something about these things, you definitely feel hopeful. Again, just appreciative to Ronnie. I also wanted to follow that up with the aspect when he talked about, people coming back and what are we getting? A lot of people assume that we just throw people in prison away. You get a sentence and you go to prison and never to be heard from again. That's not the case. Over 90% of people in prison have an out date, meaning they're coming back home. They're coming back to St. Louis. They're coming back to rural Missouri. They're coming back, to our communities. And what are we getting back? Mm-hmm. We're getting people who are more traumatized, people who have experienced violence, and who have participated in that violence in a very inhumane space. And so we're getting worse than what that person was when they went inside a prison. That is not supposed to be the case. Yeah. There's supposed to be some rehabilitation should have taken place. And honestly, for the most part, there's a lack of that.
Mm-hmm. So Ronnie mentioned this point about bringing healthy people back to community. You also have done that. What would prison have to look like for that goal to be met, for the people to be returning as healthy individuals?
That would look like, again, that word we talked about, empathy. It would look like understanding that these people do deserve rehabilitation. They deserve the mental health care that they need. They deserve all of the things that the system says it gives you when you go to prison. The system says there's rehabilitation. This is not something I'm making up. Mm. The system says that, you come here for your punishment, but we're going to make you into better people. So when you do return home, you're not committing crimes. Well, that's what the system tells us prison is, but that's actually not what it is. Mm-hmm. So I would want to have a system where people are treated humanely, where people do, again, get the mental health care, the substance abuse treatment they need, where they get classes about, that the psychological aspect of whatever traumas that they've had in their own lives that even led them to the place where they, possibly committed a crime. So prison should look like, again, what the system says it does. And that's what we're working towards.
Yeah. We need to take a quick break here, but when we come back, we'll continue this conversation about the state of Missouri's prisons with Michelle Smith. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio.
Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association. Missouri produces wood pallets, railroad ties, white oak barrels, hardwood floors, and more. Details on the variety of products made in the state are at choosewood.com.
Welcome back. Before the break, Michelle, we heard an audio clip from Ronnie Amin. One of the things that he had brought up was the fact that it's important just to treat prisoners like humans, that their existence is important. Is that the starting point? Like, is it really that basic?
It is that basic, but honestly, that is also very complex. And it's complex because you're saying that people who possibly harmed other people, right, and who possibly did something that was against our community and social code, that they deserve humanity and that they deserve still to have respect and they deserve to actually be treated in a manner where, they are seen as they matter. That can be a complex situation because, of course, there's a lot of feelings of, wanting retribution, wanting punishment, wanting revenge, right? And we are human.
Yes.
But our system is not human. Our system is supposed to work in a certain way that makes sure that when a people comes into its custody, they are returned better. So the system has a little different role than us personally, as people. But again, that it is that basic, but also that can be a very complex.
Right.
Yeah.
Something that we often talk about as being helpful to our being better humans is books. And you were here in September to talk with us about a new policy in Missouri prisons that went into effect, and it changed how people get access to books in prison. Remind us what happened with that policy, Michelle.
Sure. So as of September 25th, I believe the Missouri Department of Corrections decided that family and friends were no longer allowed to order books that are then sent to our incarcerated loved ones. And those books are sent directly from the seller, vendor, publisher. And it was honestly a reaction to something that Department of Corrections refuses to do, which is make sure that the internal issues that it has with its own staff, i.e. the people who are actually bringing in most of the drugs, that they deal with those folks. They're not doing that. They rather punish the people incarcerated and also us family members. And so this policy has went into effect, and it basically has said that we are going to dehumanize you even further by only allowing you electronic books. They have these little tablets, and so they do have access to. The DOC says 10,000 books on these tablets. But of course, just like with the mail, taking away a physical copy of a book, taking away a physical letter, further dehumanizes our incarcerated loved ones because it is putting technology above the actual human aspect of everything. Mm-hmm. And so right now they do have access to those, books on their tablet, which are, most of them are older books. Certain issues, for instance, my loved one is a paralegal. He doesn't have access to any legal books because there are no legal books of that 10,000, mostly novels and that sort of thing.
Right.
And so people are definitely being denied their rights to read what they want to read. And also, again, it's just a very depressing situation to not be able to have access to a book or, like you said, with letters, to mail as well.
Right. So then with the letters, it is the policy requires all mail to be scanned and sent digitally. I mean, we're coming up on two major holidays in the U.S., mean, does that mail policy hurt more at times like this?
It does, and even with those digital copies, they don't copy greeting cards, and that wasn't told at the beginning. But since they started doing this, greeting cards are not something they will scan in and put on people's tablets. So you can't even get a birthday card or a Christmas card from your loved one right now if you are incarcerated in Missouri DOC. But again, Elaine, the mail policy went in 2022. The book policy went in a few months ago. Still today, there are people inside who are getting drugs, who are overdosing on drugs, and who are dying from overdoses. So these limits that you put on our family members are not keeping them safer from having access to these illegal substances, because that's not how the illegal substances are getting in the first place.
Mm-hmm. So how have these policies around books and mail, how have they affected people? What are you hearing?
I am hearing that people are more depressed, which some of them are turning more to, trying to locate these illegal drugs. But it's definitely a sign of people being more depressed, lonely. When you have a child or a grandchild who's 6 years old and who colors you a nice little, holiday picture, you can't get it, right? And so that's definitely something where people are being further connected from their loved ones by not being able to have even those small keepsakes.
Mm-hmm. Now, one of the people who attended the town hall in St. Louis, someone we've had on our show, and he's kind of a celebrity among those who follow criminal justice reform, particularly here in Missouri. Bobby Bostic was 18 when a judge sentenced him for robbery he committed at age 16. Now, that sentence was 241 years in prison, an extreme sentence that drew a great deal of media attention and eventually legislative reform that made him eligible for release on parole. Bobby has been out of prison for just over a year now, and he talked with St. Louis on the Air producer Danny Wysentowski at that public forum. And Bobby said that the town hall made him think about the people still behind bars.
What I call survivor's guilt or survivor remorse is that when you get out of prison, you can never, ever forget those that you left behind. My primary focus is life sentences, because things that people complain about in prison, some of them things may get worse or they may not change, but the lifers that deserve a second chance, those over 65, that's my primary concern of coming to meetings like this, is sentencing reform. Those words that were said in there hit me in the heart, because I did 27 years and I got my second chance. Now I'm out here trying to help other people get their second chance.
That was Bobby Bostic speaking this past Saturday. Michelle, what comes up as you hear that, and what is it about Bobby's story that really stands out to you?
And again, Bobby is another dear friend of mine, and it's amazing that he is home. The one thing that really stands out to me about Bobby's case, and it's very interesting, is the fact that Bobby is not alone. I spoke to a mother whose son had, I think she said 700 years, and there are several people in our prison system that have these extreme sentences. And I will say they're not life sentences, they're the numbers, right? Which in Bobby's case, because he was a juvenile when that situation happened and the laws about juvenile lifers changed, Bobby didn't qualify because he didn't have a life sentence. He had 241 years. Mm-hmm. And legally, that's a different thing. And so that's why they had to pass a law specifically about that number of years. But because he was a juvenile, that's who is affected. A couple of people I know, they were adults when this happened. And a person with 700 years in prison today, that's a harsh, extreme sentence. He will never get out, right? And so we definitely need to do more work in expanding the law to help Bobby to other people. But yes, Bobby's case was very unique in what happened, but also it is, honestly, especially in Missouri, it is not that uncommon of a situation. There are many people in our prison with similar sentences. And right now I am focusing on that empathy aspect and really getting attention on the conditions of prison. But I hope as I build this organization to be able to address those issues of harsh sentences that, came from actually the court system, not necessarily prison, but those were court decisions.
Yeah. What legislative changes are you looking at for 2024?
Well, we actually have a package that we are going to be pushing forward. We're calling it the Common Sense Criminal Justice Package because honestly, a lot of it is common sense. And there are things in there like compensation for people who are exonerees. So when you are wrongfully convicted in this state and you serve many years, for instance, this past year, friend Lamar got out. He did 28 years. He was wrongfully convicted.
Right.
Right now, you don't. You're eligible to be compensated by the state for the wrongful conviction only if you had an exoneration based on DNA. Most exonerations are not based on DNA in Missouri. They made that a law because it didn't really affect anybody. But most people are because of informants, because of prosecutorial police misconduct, and those people right now don't qualify for compensation. So Lamar came home after 28 years, and he didn't get so much as an apology, let alone 2 pennies to rub together for being incarcerated that long. And so that's something that we're trying to get compensation for exonerees. We're trying to deal with how the informants lead to people being wrongfully convicted and other things that affect people in prison, like good time credit, making sure that if you're inside and you're doing the things that you should be doing to rehabilitate yourself, that you are rewarded for those things as well. So we have a package of 8 bills that we're going to be pushing this upcoming session, and building this coalition means that we'll have more people to come to the Capitol to talk to their own elected officials and really try to push forward and urge these reforms to be passed and then enacted properly.
Now, we reached out to the Missouri Department of Corrections about conditions in the prison, and a spokeswoman told us that Missouri has, quote, more reentry programs, more education options, more job training, more access to technology, more treatment programs, and more ways to keep residents connected to their families than ever before. The statement also noted the existence of honor programs, which residents with a history of pro-social behaviors can live in small communities in unstaffed housing units and enjoy more freedom of movement, more autonomy, lounge areas, study space, private recreation yards, and a multitude of other privileges, unquote. Michelle, what do you make of that statement? I mean, does it at all reflect what you've heard from people who are actually in Missouri's prisons?
That's interesting. That statement was given. Yes, those things do exist, but we really have to break them down. For instance, the program that was spoken about, the residents, live separately and get more benefits, etc. Currently, there are 14 people in that. It's called Dynamo. It's a program called Dynamo. It's up in Bowling Green Prison. There are 14 people in the prison, and each one of those men have been in prison more than 30 years. We shouldn't be holding people who are 70, 80 years old in prison that long, because that you age out of being able, to even commit crime after a certain amount of time. I know several people in that program, and when you're 65, 70 years old, you don't need to be in prison. So telling us that, yes, that those programs exist, but there are issues with them also. Even with the other programming, the classes, et cetera, because the prisons are short-staffed a lot, they're locked down and they don't even go to the classes many times. I know in one prison, in 2-week period, they missed their classes because every time the class was held, the prison is short-staffed, and they have to, put the people where there is like the housing units and not in the areas where the classes are being held. So there are even a lot of issues, even in those statements that she made, that I'm assuming it was Ms. Polgeman made about the programming that they have inside.
And just as we close, are these sorts of programs at least a step in the right direction?
I believe they are a step in the right direction, but when you compare them to the atrocities that are still going on, again, for the last several years, over 100 people died in our prisons. Last week, a man named Chad Moore died in the prison in Farmington, Missouri. He was 27 years old. Why? Right? We don't know. Most of the people who die, we don't get a final answer of why they died. People have health conditions. People can't get surgeries they need. So yes, there are some good things happening and more need to happen, but there is no accountability or transparency in any of even those programs. And the things that are happening that are not okay, that are inhumane and that are violent, those good things don't take away from that.
Michelle, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you.
This episode was produced by Danny Wissentowski.
Audio engineering and podcast design by Aaron Dorr.
Our executive producer is Alex Hoyer.
St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here.
St. Louis on the Air proudly supports local artists by using music from Life Creative Group.
Do you find yourself regularly listening to episodes of St. Louis on the Air? Suggest us to a friend you think might enjoy our conversations, and leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the simplest way to help people discover our show. Thank you.
St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri St. Louis.
Support comes from Missouri Forest Products Association, committed to sustainable and sound conservation of the state's forests, which support more than 41,000 Missouri jobs, resulting in a $10 billion industry. ChooseWood.com.